When you hear security will escort you out, something has gone wrong in the office. My mother works in an office and I've heard these conversations since childhood, and this story is not about hype or just a video. It's about what happens in real life. All titles, companies and names are fictional. We do this so that you can recognize yourself and not repeat other people's mistakes.
Security will escort you out, she said, without even looking up from her laptop. I was still holding the compliance report I'd prepared for that morning's board audit, still in the room, still breathing. Kendall Voss didn't care. She just kept typing, loud, shallow strokes like someone trying to make noise so no one notices the silence coming next. That's how Meridian Ellison's new CEO operated. Like reality was an optional plug-in. Like governance didn't apply to people with glossy resumes and speaking slots at tech summits. The room was full of observers, 2 VPs, an HR director who avoided eye contact, and a security guard already shifting from one foot to the other like he didn't want to be here either. I didn't argue, didn't flinch, just set the report on the edge of the table and slowly unclipped my badge. No drama, no parting speech. I handed it over, calmly. If you're listening to this, odds are you like these kinds of stories. And truth is, 97% of people never hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second, and it really helps the team bring you more of these true, twisted, and satisfying tales. So give it a like, hit subscribe, and let's keep going. Back to Kendall. She didn't know what she'd just touched, not the badge, what it triggered. For nearly 5 years, I ran identity and access governance at Meridian Ellison Group, Philadelphia HQ, Manhattan Satellites, a secure contract data center in Ashburn, Virginia. I wasn't anyone's headline, and I liked it that way. I didn't climb stages or send team-wide gifts for morale. I worked inside the bones of the organization, the stuff most people forget until it fails. I built the credentialing lattice they relied on, designed the behavioral threshold policies, structured the exception logs so no executive could slip through with a wink and a temp login. When we got audited, I was the one sitting in the back, correcting the external analysts in real time. Politely, of course. Most of the C-suite didn't even understand how deep my credentials ran. At the board level, I was listed as Technical Custodian IDG Root, buried in a footnote under the governance charter. Kendall Voss never even read the charter. I know, because her first town hall referenced a version that had been sunsetted 2 years ago, and I let her talk. At first. Her second week, she started pushing what she called zero past compliance, said we had to strip out legacy entitlements, flatten control structures, and eliminate manual overrides, which sounded fine in theory. But when she told one VP on a hot mic that she wanted to reset governance from scratch, I started archiving everything, every email, every revision, every call summary I could access. She used phrases like agile cleanup, automated redundancy, and access flattening, buzzwords, empty jargon, and none of it respected the actual risk matrix our infrastructure lived inside. I sent her 3 memos, short, factual, no emotion. She responded once. Noted. Please focus on execution, not interpretation. Interpretation, that's what she thought this was. By the time she scheduled the Friday meeting, the one where she fired me, I'd already run the protocol simulation 5 times. Clause 44B, board ratified 3 years ago, approved under compliance overhaul measures after a vendor leak exposed 2 inactive tokens. It was a dormant control kernel tied directly to the badge credentials of the root custodian, me, and it activated when one of 2 things happened: death, or forced separation without redundancy reissue. Kendall didn't issue a redundancy. She didn't even ask who held the credential keys. And so, when I handed her my badge, the system assumed the worst. Not for me, for them. She called it a streamlined sprint, like identity governance was some bloated to-do list instead of the only thing standing between us and a lawsuit. Kendall brought in an outside contractor. No clearance, no legacy system knowledge, just a PowerPoint deck and a tight blazer, and gave him a clipboard with a smile like she was handing over the future. Map redundant access dependencies, she said. Translation? Gut anything that looked like complexity. By mid-Q4, they were disabling accounts like they were spam folders. MFA delays? Ignored. Admin tokens. Rotated out. The long session root logs I'd spent 3 years perfecting, shortened without notice. A few of my audit alerts just stopped showing up. At first, I assumed it was a bug. Then I realized it wasn't a mistake. It was Kendall's plan. I flagged the risk. Twice. Once with a polite memo that listed 5 known outages caused by efficiency deletions. Second time, I added a chart. Kendall looked at it like I'd handed her a Sudoku puzzle soaked in napalm. "This isn't personal," she said. "We're not letting one person hold the keys anymore." The room laughed politely. I didn't. Because what she didn't know, and clearly didn't ask about, was that holding keys and holding authority aren't the same thing. Years back, before Kendall ever showed up with her pre-written LinkedIn resignation post disguised as a 5-year plan, we had a breach scare. Not public, not dramatic, but close. One of our board members accessed a dormant financial portal using an expired backup credential. A flag went off. An alert pinged my terminal at 2:03 a.m. I froze access within 30 seconds. The incident was closed, quietly. But the board, rattled, approved a new layer of credential governance that same quarter, a fail-safe built into the badge firmware and the governance bylaws. Clause 44B, the board access credential override. It wasn't a system feature. It was a legal construct. It bypassed the executive stack entirely. One custodian, one activation trigger, one outcome. And that custodian? Me. They voted it in unanimously. I built the activation script. I wrote the firmware hook. And I buried the documentation inside a governance packet so dense only legal, and I knew where it lived. No one outside the board and my team even saw the vote minutes. Kendall never asked. Not once. She assumed streamlining meant stripping access, flattening control trees, speed over structure. She didn't know Clause 44B wasn't about protecting me. It was about protecting them from what happens when someone like her decides authority is a costume you put on. So I watched. Quietly. I re-enabled shadow flags under pseudonyms, started redirecting my log trails to escrow, air-gapped a copy of the credential map Kendall's team was gutting, and marked it with one simple header: Contingency Activation Path, Custodial Route Only. I wasn't paranoid. I was preparing for the exact moment when someone who didn't understand systems tried to control them. And when they tried to control me, well, I'd already moved beyond control. I was governance, with teeth. The firing wasn't dramatic, not in the way most people picture it. There was no yelling, no heated exchange. Just a Tuesday morning with cold coffee and a quiet inbox. 8:12 a.m. sharp, my phone buzzed. "Come to my office, now." I already knew. She didn't schedule it, didn't give me the dignity of a calendar block or a subject line like transition planning or leadership restructure. Nothing cute, just the text. By the time I reached the executive wing, security was already posted outside her glass-walled corner office, hands crossed, eyes everywhere but mine. It was performative, deliberate. Kendall wanted the optics. Her, calm and decisive, me, removed like a corrupted file. She didn't stand, she didn't even greet me, just slid a manila envelope across the desk like I was some contractor past their expiration date. "You're done," she said. "Effective immediately. Hand over your badge. Security will escort you out." No thank you. No handshake. No transition. Just a command. The envelope sat there like it was supposed to swallow 5 years of infrastructure, governance, and 3 a.m. crisis prevention. I didn't even look at it. I looked at her. Then at the badge on my chest. "You're sure you want it back right now?" I asked. That's when she smirked. The kind of smirk that only lives on people who think titles mean power and credentials are just keychains. "Don't flatter yourself," she said. "It's a piece of plastic." I nodded once. Didn't argue, didn't blink, just unclipped the badge with 2 fingers and placed it dead center on her desk. No flourish, no sound, just contact. And I walked, box in hand. 1 plant, 1 backup drive, 2 framed photos. Calm, steady, almost bored. I could hear security falling into step behind me, but they didn't touch me. I think they knew, not why, but that something had shifted. Because here's what Kendall didn't know. That badge, it wasn't just a token. It wasn't even the symbol of power. It was power. Inside that little plastic square was embedded a short-range RFID key hard-coded with the last live instance of custodial root under clause 44B. She thought she was reclaiming access. She was detonating it. 15 seconds after the badge left my hand, the system recognized the event. A firmware timestamp pinged the access chain. A governance routine activated in the background, silent, surgical, irreversible. Every server connected to the root lattice registered a custody anomaly. The badge had been surrendered. The protocol, Clause 44B, began to execute. And Kendall, still smirking in her office, had no idea that her need for dominance just flipped the only switch she should have left untouched. She thought she'd walked me out. But really? She just walked the entire company into a fire they couldn't put out. At exactly 8:26 a.m., 12 minutes after I placed the badge on her desk and walked out without so much as a raised voice, Meridian Ellison's internal network blinked. Not a full blackout, just a breath. A momentary hesitation that would have gone unnoticed if you weren't watching for it. But the right systems were, and I always made sure they were. First, the privileged access tokens began to fail, quietly, one by one. Not a dramatic crash, just silent rejections. Access denied for user X, reauthentication required, token mismatch, authentication timeout. All across the company, from procurement to financial oversight, systems began denying executive logins they'd approved seconds earlier. People assumed it was a load issue or maybe another certificate refresh gone sideways. It wasn't. Then the board credential pings started shifting. Our executive authentication framework, color-coded for real-time status, had a heartbeat line that always pulsed green under normal conditions. By 8:28 a.m., it went yellow. By 8:30 a.m., it pulsed red. Someone on the board flagged it to internal audit. The emergency ledger, a contingency log I'd configured years earlier, began populating on its own, one entry per second. Sourced directly from the root governance kernel. The titles were plain, robotic. Custody anomaly detected. Clause 44B active protocol sweep. Revalidation of credential chains pending. It was all automated. No human input, no manual override. Kendall's executive assistant was the first to ask out loud, "Why is my access restricted?" 5 minutes later, Kendall herself marched into the IT command pod like she owned the place. "What the hell is happening?" she asked. "Looks like an SSO cert expired," someone offered, guessing. "Maybe someone pushed the wrong GPO," said another. Kendall narrowed her eyes. "Fix it." They couldn't. Because this wasn't a system crash, it wasn't a misfire or a patching error. This was Clause 44B doing what it was designed to do, assume a worst-case scenario and lock the entire governance skeleton until custody was reestablished. From the system's perspective, the badge hadn't been decommissioned. It had been surrendered, unannounced, unplanned, and without redundancy reassignment. According to board policy, that qualified as a potential breach, and breaches don't get fixed by the help desk. Kendall logged into her own admin console, trying to brute force the overrides. Error. Insufficient privileges, credential chain mismatch. Her title meant nothing here. Not because I revoked her access. I didn't need to. The system did it for me. Because Clause 44B was never about executives. It was about containment. Containment of ignorance, containment of arrogance. And now Kendall was locked out of her own castle while the system she mocked as legacy clutter assessed whether her leadership posed an internal threat. She kept pacing, kept typing, and I, already off-site, sat calmly in a cafe across from the courthouse, sipping a black coffee, watching the incident ticker scroll from my escrow dashboard. They thought they fired me. But Clause 44B had just fired back. By 9 a.m., the building didn't feel chaotic, not on the surface. Phones still rang, elevators still dinged, people still walked to meetings they couldn't open doors to. But the speed, the invisible churn of urgent Slack messages, calendar purges, reauthentication loops, had kicked up like a silent fire spreading beneath the floorboards. The panic was quiet, institutional, the kind of panic that doesn't scream, it just accelerates. Audit logs lit up with entries tagged Custodian Transfer Event. Someone in risk pinged compliance. Compliance opened a thread with legal. Legal called the board's general counsel. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. Why was there a custody event logged with no board vote? Kendall tried to bluff through it. She was terminated. Routine clearance. Compliance asked the next question out loud. Who signed the custodian termination authorization? Silence. Because there wasn't one. Because there couldn't be one, not without the board. Kendall's mouth tightened. "Just give me the master bypass," she said to the contractor. Her tone had shifted. It wasn't arrogant now. It was brittle. He looked like he regretted waking up that day. "It's not a normal bypass," he said. Quiet. Careful, because it wasn't. And he knew it. The bypass she wanted didn't live in a dashboard or a password manager. It wasn't tucked inside some reset email or on a recovery phone. It was embedded. In governance, in paper, in history. It was clause locked into the bylaws, tied directly to board-approved compliance protocol, and verified through a hardware-level attestation check. The attestation used 2 layers. 1, a cryptographic match between the custodian's last known token signature, and 2, board resolution validation confirming intent to transfer. In simpler terms, without both the custodian and the board, the system assumed compromise, and in case of compromise, it locked every root-level credential chain until attestation passed again. I helped write that policy. Back when a certain former COO tried to sneak a credential escalation past the board in a merger quarter, investors went nuclear. One even threatened litigation. The board asked me how we could guarantee no single executive, not even the CEO, could hijack access again. I gave them Clause 44B. It was ratified unanimously, documented, notarized, stored in 3 places: Legal Counsel's archive, Compliance Protocol binder, and my encrypted badge. Kendall never read it. She'd only read one thing: my salary line. She saw technical custodian IDG root and assumed it was ceremonial. A legacy role. Something she could delete like an unused macro in her latest pivot deck. But governance doesn't care about titles, or resumes, or whether your blazer matches your brand strategy. It cares about one thing: custody. And right now, the system was doing exactly what it was built to do, treating Kendall like an unauthorized actor in a house wired for silent lockdown. By 9:17 a.m., legal issued a formal request to the board. Immediate convening required. Clause 44B triggered. Custodian role terminated without sign-off. The subject line might as well have read, "You just lit a fire in the server room." And the only extinguisher? Me. At 9:18 a.m., a crisp, 1-line email hit every major investor's inbox. Due to a technical governance issue, today's Q&A call is postponed. That was it. No reschedule date, no press release, no damage control statement pre-approved by PR. Just the phrase, technical governance issue, which in corporate finance might as well be a red siren with a voice screaming, "We can't prove who's in charge." And if you can't prove who's in charge, you don't talk to investors, you don't file SEC updates, you don't touch quarterly guidance, you don't even hint at forward strategy, because without verified control, every word becomes potential securities fraud. The Q&A call was supposed to be Kendall's victory lap. She'd stacked it with talking points about streamlined access models and agile governance architecture. I saw the notes before they locked me out. It was all buzzwords and recycled vision slides. She tried to push the call anyway, tried to bluff, but the chairman intervened. Quietly, definitively. The call wasn't just postponed, it was shut down. Because when Clause 44B triggers, the board can't even see real-time access logs without custodian verification. And since she terminated me, without process, no one could vouch for the governance stack, not even Kendall herself. At the same time, the audit ledger was still writing. Every 5 seconds, a new entry, new timestamp, new log detail. Each line now a breadcrumb trail, one that would soon become part of a very expensive explanation to regulators, investors, and legal. They didn't know it yet. But every moment they stayed in lockdown was becoming evidence. I didn't call anyone, didn't scream or threaten or tweet. I just opened my laptop in that same cafe, clicked forward on the termination email, and sent it to my attorney. Subject: termination without procedure, custodian role. I added a short message. Please notify the Board of Governance breach under Clause 44B. No formal reassignment occurred. Badge was surrendered without credential transfer protocol. I will comply with attestation audit upon formal request. That's all. No emotion, no drama. Just the clean, silent weapon people like Kendall never see coming. Protocol. My attorney replied 3 minutes later. Received. Notifying counsel now. By 9:41, the board's outside legal firm had opened a formal review case. The clock wasn't just ticking anymore, it was recording. And the sound was starting to echo. By Thursday morning, the mask finally cracked. The chairman sat at the end of a long, silent table with a full printed report, thick, tabbed, and heavier than any PowerPoint Kendall had ever pitched. Every section had its own color-coded divider: custody event timeline, governance breach summary, procedural failure review. It was the kind of document that didn't just outline what happened, it assigned accountability in permanent ink. At the center of it all, the badge. More specifically, the way it was taken. Legal had combed through Kendall's termination sequence, every step, every timestamp, every line item signed by HR and security, and there it was. Right in the middle of the workflow audit trail, badge surrendered under directive, escorted immediately from premises, custodian privileges deprovisioned without reassignment, signed, initialed, documented. That detail wasn't just unkind, it was governance negligence. Clause 44B didn't care if a firing was personal or professional. It didn't care if Kendall liked me or thought I was obsolete. It only cared whether the legal custodian was removed in accordance with board protocol, and she hadn't even asked what the protocol was. Now the system had responded exactly as designed, not emotionally, not maliciously, just mechanically. The board's general counsel circled one specific cost line in red ink during the meeting. Clause 44B remediation fee, $6.7 triggered automatically the moment emergency governance recovery had to be executed without prior transition. It covered protocol audit teams, chain of custody validators, full infrastructure attestation rebuild, and breach liability insurance premium hikes. Kendall tried to spin it. This was sabotage. She knew what the badge would do. Legal didn't even blink. The system did what the bylaws told it to do. The firm's lead counsel said, "Your job was to read them." The room went quiet, because that was the moment it sank in. This wasn't a mistake they could memo away or blame on legacy complexity. It was a contractual hit. A $6.7 million governance invoice backed by legal precedent and clause activation logs timestamped down to the millisecond. Nobody had to raise their voice. Nobody had to call me. They didn't even know that I'd already been contacted, quietly, professionally, by 2 board members and the CFO. The tone was clear, not an apology, a recalibration. Kendall didn't get that call. She just sat in the glass conference room watching her empire shrink with every page turn. Her control was gone. Her authority, stripped bare, not by rebellion, not by outrage, by structure, by a badge she didn't understand, connected to a system she didn't bother to read, triggering a cost she never imagined she'd be held responsible for. And I didn't speak, didn't tweet, didn't celebrate. I just opened a reply draft to the CFO's assistant and typed 2 words. Still available. The board meeting that followed wasn't loud either. That's the thing about real power. It doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs a quorum, a binder of procedures, and a pen. The governance reset went forward exactly how Clause 44B required it to. Motion, second, vote, documentation, credential regeneration. No applause, no spin, just the surgical restoration of structure. A new custodian was named, someone from legal, someone who had sat in on 3 of my past compliance workshops and didn't speak unless it mattered. Smart choice. Safe hands. The firmware keys were regenerated, the attestation cycle re-signed, and the privileged credential authority formally separated from the executive branch. Which meant Kendall. She never got it back. Per the very bylaws she tried to override with a smirk and a security escort, she was now explicitly barred from initiating or approving privileged credential policy changes. Not suspended, not warned, barred, on paper, by vote, irrevocable. There was no internal memo about it, no apology tour, no learning module added to the training portal. Her name just disappeared. 2 weeks after the incident, she was quietly removed from the internal org chart. No email, no statement. Just a quiet update under the familiar phrase, leadership transition. Her LinkedIn changed titles the next day to Advisor R Modernization Strategist, Board Consultant, Open to Opportunities. She thought she'd left a legacy. Turns out, the only legacy she left was a 6-figure burn on the Q4 ledger and a footnote in a compliance PDF no one outside governance would ever read. As for me, I didn't return to my old desk. I didn't want it. Instead, Ellison signed a 9-month governance oversight contract with my consulting firm, Iron Crest Systems. I wrote the engagement terms myself. Oversight authority, root credential rotation schedule, and direct board visibility. No middle layers, no optics. Just clean execution. Same work. Higher rate. No politics. No org chart. They offered me a badge. I declined. Didn't need one. Because my name wasn't coming back into the system as an employee. It was coming back as part of the system itself. Permanent, untouchable, and exactly where I'd designed it to belong. Months passed. The headlines moved on as they always do. Investors got their reassurances, systems stabilized. Ellison filed its annual disclosures right on time, polished and orderly. But if you knew where to look, if you knew what you were looking for, there was one small line buried deep in the compliance appendix. Governance exception event. Clause 44B activation. Custodial transition complete. Remediation procedures executed. All systems operational, clean, controlled, dehydrated of drama. But just below that, in even smaller print, sat a technical footnote. Board-level custody verification continues to ping legacy endpoint, IRN Crest 04 for historical validation purposes. Signal response retained as part of attestation chain. That's me. Every time the board authenticates custody history, every time they revalidate that no one's pulling strings they shouldn't, one packet still pings my firm's endpoint. IRN Crest 04. Just a flicker, just a handshake, just a little light in the dark that says, yes, the chain is intact. Yes, the history holds. No one notices it during normal operations. Not the executives, not the VPs, not even the new custodian, but the system remembers. The code I wrote remembers. The structure I built doesn't forget. Not who designed it, not what triggered it, and definitely not why it exists. It's just a signal, just a log entry, but it's permanent. An artifact of a moment when someone who thought power lived in titles and office space decided to rip out a foundation she didn't understand. Kendall thought she was erasing an employee. What she was really doing, what she actually did, was touch the governance spine of a multi-billion-dollar company with bare hands. No gloves, no training, no clue. And now, somewhere inside Ellison's heartbeat, a light still blinks. Not for me. For the system, because I was never just part of the company. I was the part that makes sure it survives the people who think they're above it.